now I'd like to invite on stage Aslı Erdoğan. Her third book, The City in Crimson Cloak, received rave reviews in Turkey, Europe, and the US, with over 200 articles, and was published in French, Norwegian, German, Bosnian, Arabic, Bulgarian, Swedish, and various other languages, including English. In 1998, she started to write a column in the intellectual paper Radical. Her column, The Others, in which she touched taboo subjects such as prisons, torture, the Kurdish issue, and women's rights, brought her both fame and trouble, and she was fired in 2001. After a long silence in which she had to face a lynching campaign, she published a book of poetic prose, In the Silence of Life, and received Dunya, the Book of the Year award. She collected her essays, which have been translated into more than a dozen languages, in 3 books. In 2010, she returned to Radical, but was fired again. She started to write a column for Özgür Gündem, the Kurdish paper, and as a result, she was charged of terrorism and spent 4.5 months in prison. She is currently in exile in Frankfurt, Germany. Aslı Erdoğan has also participated in exhibitions as a writing artist and collaborated with artists such as Gada Amer and François Derot. Her texts were adapted to theater, dance theater, classical ballet, radio, and film. Her life was turned into a documentary by Osman Okan, which deals with 6 writers, including Orhan Pamuk and Yaşar Kemal. Her latest book, The Stone Building, received the most prestigious literary award, Sait Faik, in Turkey in 2010, and is currently being translated into Swedish, Norwegian, and French. Aslı will be interviewed by Nadia Mifsud.
Hi, Aslı.
Hello to everybody, and many, many thanks for inviting me here. Such a great opportunity.
It's an honor for us to have you here.
Thank you for
How are
coming.
you?
Much better after I saw Mediterranean Sea. I'm partially Mediterranean, so like coming home in a way.
I was going to say welcome to Malta because...
Thank you.
You were telling me in an earlier conversation that the word Malta had a particular meaning in prison jargon.
Yeah, it is. I don't know the origins, but in the prisons, Malta is the big corridor between the wards and the cells. So it's kind of a free place because you are, after all, out of the cell or out of the ward and walking in a long corridor. And it's called, for a reason I don't know, Malta.
But I hope that after today and after this festival and after your stay here, Malta will have lots of other meanings for you besides the meaning that it had in prison.
Yeah, it is, surely. It's a very gorgeous island, and I'm so happy to be here, even only for a few days.
And we're happy to have you. So, okay, let's talk a little bit about your work.
Okay.
So, among your first writings, one finds The Seashell Man and The City in Crimson Cloak. These were published in 1994 and 1998, respectively. Now, both novels have a very strong fictional narrative, but underlying that narrative, there is a strong autobiographical tinge too. Let me give a few hints to our audience. In The Seashell Man, the main character is a young nuclear physicist, just like you were before you decided to take up writing. The City in Crimson Cloak is as much a portrait of Özgür, who is herself a writer, as of Rio de Janeiro, where you yourself worked and lived for 2 years. The City in Crimson Cloak brought you international recognition and is still considered by many as one of your masterpieces. How do you look back on those early texts?
Well, The City in Crimson Cloak is still my favorite book. It has a very unique place in in my personal history and in my writing history. And it was born actually from one question a journalist asked me. That time I had 2 books, also The Miracles Mandarin, which is not yet translated into English. And the question was a simple one. She asked me, do you write about yourself in your books? Because, yes, they were so, of course, in The Miracles Mandarin, narrator is a one-eyed woman.
Yes.
And many people for a long time thought I have only one eye. And I answered her, semi-joking, yes, when I find her. And The City in Crimson Cloak was actually born from that question of the written self. And there Özgür is actually not a writer, or she's not trying to be a writer. She only wants to tell her own story. This is the only way she can think of getting out of this trauma, or the prison of Rio de Janeiro, which is clearly a metaphor, which will change throughout the book. And this is actually my interpretation of the Orpheus myth, except that Orpheus and Eurydice are the same person. It's just one woman, she and her written self. They play the role of Orpheus and Eurydice, where Eurydice will take Orpheus, Özgür, to the land of the dead in the end. And there in this book I asked all the questions that have meaning for me still. Why do I write? Why do we write? Why do we tell our story? What is its relation with death, with the knowledge of death? Why did Orpheus turn back? And it was a very meaningful question for me that time. I was only 30 years old when I wrote that book, and I think it's too early actually to go so close to death. I was very ill, and me and many people believed that this was a fatal illness. So for me, death, looking at death was something very real. It was not an intellectual game. That is what makes the book so different and so special for me. I never got so fixated on Orpheus again, because death is, even in prison, was actually further compared to that period of very strange illness. And I wrote the book and I recovered.
Right. I will ask you later on a question about the relationship between the body and the writing. But you told me something this morning. It's about the language in this book, The City in Crimson Cloak. And I was wondering how much the fact that you wrote it after having spent 2 years in Rio, where you didn't speak any Turkish, how did it affect the writing itself? What about the language?
Well, one other reason why this book is special for me is the language I managed to catch, the music and the rhythm, and unfortunately only in the native tongue. I'm so sorry, Amy Spangler, but I don't like the English translation, and I wish I could be a part of this translation workshop where we could really work on this text, because my English is not enough to recreate the text. But maybe because I had missed my language so much in that 2 years, I was kind of rediscovering it. In fact, I made also some very stupid mistakes. One of my editors showed me, are you a tourist or what? What is there was such a, definitely an English speaker would write that. And some people catch it. They say, were you thinking in another language when you wrote that book? But also I was like a little child, charmed by rediscovering the rhythms and the secrets of Turkish. And also I had one more luck. One of the editors of this book, and he rarely edits a book. He's dead by now, was the editor-in-chief of that big publisher who accepted me. That time was the biggest publisher in Turkey, and they rarely ever took young writers. He was the son of Nazım Hikmet, our biggest poet, maybe. And he knew Turkish very well. I mean, this generation probably was the last generation who really spoke Turkish beautifully. And he gave me like a 3-hour lesson on how many grammar mistakes even very famous writers make. And I got it, I learned it in 3 hours. The secrets, let's say, the traps of Turkish. So, and it was a valuable lesson. And yes, yeah, the language of this book, yeah, I managed to catch the rhythm I wanted. So it has to be a Dionysian rhythm, language, music. And I managed, and which I don't think I managed in my later books, which were more as an experienced writer, but had lost this childish charm with being charmed with my own language.
Right. So we'll be shortly hearing a short extract from this book, because I know that it is very dear to you. But what about the first publication, The Seashell Men?
Well, I'm a very, how would you say, discriminating mother. I don't like that book, honestly saying. It's not actually my first book. The Miraculous Mandarin was written first, but I hadn't published it for like 5 years. Right. I had actually no ambitions of being a writer or anything like that. The Seashell Man was written under very special circumstances. I had just returned from CERN to Turkey, the Turkey of 1993. The Turkish-Kurdish war is at its peak. Really, you could be searched 6 times a day, police search. Really, and coming back from Brazil, I had already forgotten the state violence. And I was living, coming back from CERN. I was actually working as a physicist in the university, as a teacher, but I lived with African immigrants, which most of them were having a clandestine life because of papers and all this, and they were the first group that ventured out to Turkey. And they faced an enormous racist violence, which I was the victim also, and the witness, which is sometimes a more difficult role, being caught between the Turkish society and Africans, and being responsible to both sides in a way. So I wrote the book in a very hurried manner, and it's like in 2 months. And then there was the arrestation, or they took like 157 Africans to a camp, and I wrote about that. It's one of my only article that never was published. It was a quite good article, in fact, but nobody wanted it. So I got into trouble, serious trouble, and I had to leave to Brazil. And on paper, on my CV, it looked like I'm going for a PhD. Everything looks so clear. But the real reason was that I had to leave Turkey as soon as possible, and my connections at CERN, and I had in my CV something a golden key, CERN experience in 90s, a Higgs physicist. I'm the first Higgs physicist from Turkey. And in 2 months, I found myself in Rio de Janeiro with just 1 word of Portuguese or something. So the Shell Man, honestly, not exaggerating, I gave it to the publisher 5 p.m. and next morning, I took the 7 a.m. plane to Paris and to Brazil. Literally last day, last hours of Turkey. So my relation with that book is, of course, shadowed by the events of that year. And to finish the book was more important. And if I wish now, if I had 2 more months, I could have made the book I wanted to make. But life didn't permit. And also maybe the person I was very much in love with when I wrote the book later on had been missing, and he's still missing. So this book kind of reminds me of his void in a way. Like I feel sort of guilt. I could have given that time and love to him, but I preferred, as every writer is very selfish, I think, my last months in Turkey entirely to a book. So maybe this explains why I can't like my first child.
Yes, I understand that particular feeling about it. But the fact that it has recently been published in France to, I would say, great public and critical acclaim, does it validate it in your eyes? Does it, would you, I know that you've never read it again.
Yeah, well, I am very peculiar. I take into account what others say on my books, very much. In fact, much more than I show. I'm not very, I couldn't build that self-confidence even in 25 years. But there is also a part in me which knows when I have done my best and when I haven't. And there, even if 1 million people say the City in Crimson Cloak is a horrible book, I say, no, I like it. I will defend the book. But the other, I can't defend the book, even to myself. I know, I see its faults. I know it, well, yeah, maybe this is the answer.
Okay. Well, since you like the City in Crimson Cloak so much, why don't you read a little bit for us in Turkish so that the audience here can appreciate the rhythm and the sound of it?
I hope I don't disappoint you, but I must give one information about the book because the book was written in 7 chapters of one single day in Özgür's life, and this is her last day. But the City in Crimson Cloak is actually the novel she is writing. So initially we'd have very different styles, me and her, which is much more apparent in the original language. And she is more of a poet than me. I'm the narrator. And the part I will read now is written by Özgür. And slowly in the book, I start to imitate Özgür's language until we actually repeat the same sentences. And one last information I should give, Özgür is a very common name in Turkey. It's a bisexual name, could be a man's and a woman's name, and means free. So this whole book is about actually how can you be free of your destiny by writing it. Rio sokaklarında bir yolcu 3. Alev alev yanan kent hummaya tutulmuşçasına titriyor. Isınan asfaltın bulut bulut saldığı su buharına gömülmüş, kumlara serili dev bir balina gibi soluk alıp vermeye çalışıyor. Günlerdir tek bir esinti gelmiyor kumsallardan. Sıcaklık içerilere doğru giderek yükseliyor, kent merkezinde 45'e varıyor. Sokak köpeklerinin ağzı köpük köpük. Sokak çocuklarının dudakları susuzluktan çatlamış. Okyanusun mecalsiz dalgaları kentin yaralarını yalıyor. İnsan kokan tozlu caddeleri yıkayan yalnızca ışık yağmuru. Çiğ, keskin gözleri acıtan tropikal ışık, renkleri önüne katmış, sürükleyip götürüyor. Dayanılması güç öğleden sonralar. Zaman kör uçuşta. Saatler eğilip bükülüyor, uğulduyor, kıvranıyor. Bütün gövdeler yorgun, yapış yapış, son hücresine dek doymuş. Ölüme çağıran bir uykuda gece için güç toplamaya çalışıyor. Gün, lezzetli kısımları yiyip bitirilmiş bir meyve gibi çürümeye terk edilmiş. Rio sokaklarında amaçsız, başıboş dolaşan bir Türk kadını. Bir salyangoz kabuğuna nasıl çekilirse, öyle sığınmış kendi benliğine. Her an kafasına dayanacak bir silahın korkusu içinde. Ağzı zımpara kağıdı gibi. Adımları titrek, koltuk altlarında iri ter halkaları. Gözlerinden başka güvenebileceği hiçbir şeyi yok. Ufku bakışlarıyla sınırlı. Bu vahşi topraklarda yürürlükten kaldırılmış geleceğe doğru solgun varlığını sürüklemeye çalışıyor. Sürekli aç ama yemekten tiksiniyor. Sürekli uykusuz ama karabasanlardan korkuyor. Sürekli susuz ama neyin susuzluğunu çektiğini bilemiyor. Sigaraları uçuca ekleyerek içiyor ve dudaklarının ikide bir titremesine engel olamıyor. Yanından geçip giden rastgele bir kola sarılmak ve bir sözcük dilenmek istiyor. Ne aşk, ne sevgi, ne dostluk. Yalnızca tek bir sözcük. Bütün seslere anlam verecek o tek sözcük. Acımasızlığı bir türlü öğrenememiş sırtının yorgun gölgesi, sokak insanlarını yalayıp geçiyor.
For those of you who do not understand Turkish, like Üsken Çikluna is going to read the English translation first.
A traveler in the streets of Rio. Number 3. The city trembles feverishly in a raging fire, like a huge beached whale it struggles to breathe, buried beneath the clouds of steam rising from the hot asphalt. Not a single breeze has blown in from the beach for days now. The heat rises as it drifts inland, hitting 45 in center city. Street dogs foam at the mouth. The street children's lips are cracked from dehydration. The ocean's feeble waves lick at the city's wounds. Only a downpour of light washes the dusty avenues that reek of humans. The raw, sharp, painfully dazzling tropical sunshine protracts colors in a trail of haze. Barely bearable afternoons. Time flying blindly by. The hours squirm, wail, writhe. All bodies are exhausted, sticky, sated to the very last cell. In a slumber that beckons her to death, she tries to gather strength for the night. The day has been abandoned to rot, like a piece of fruit that's had its savory sections consumed. A Turkish woman wandering aimlessly about the streets of Rio, having taken refuge in her own self, like a snail retreating into its shell, fearing the imminent pistol at her temple, her mouth like sandpaper, taking tremulous steps, large rings of sweat at her armpits. There is nothing she can trust except for her own eyes. The horizon is limited to her gaze. She struggles to drag her pale existence towards the future, which has been repealed here on these savage lands. She is constantly hungry, but disgusted by food. She is constantly tired, but afraid of nightmares. She is constantly thirsty, but knows not what for. She smokes one cigarette after the other and cannot stop her lips from trembling. She wants to slip her arm into that of a random passerby and beg for a word, not for love or romance or friendship, just one word. That single word that will give meaning to all sounds. The weary shadow of her back, entirely incapable of cruelty, brushes past the street people.
Thank you. Thank you, Kenneth, and thank you, Aslı. You did say in your first answer, you describe your texts as Tunisian. Sometimes you refer to them as prose poems. And I know that one critic also described your narrative style as a crossfire of metaphors.
Mm-hmm.
Now, one obvious example for me is the novella The Stone Building.
Yeah.
It's got this distinctive dreamlike tone.
Mm-hmm.
But even when I read some of your articles,
Mm-hmm.
I do feel that most of them are more like poetic compositions than journalistic pieces. But beyond that metaphorical style, there's also a strong physicality to your texts, a kind of rhythm that pervades them. And this rhythm sustains and enhances the imagery. So the question that I have for you now is, how would you describe the relationship between the writing and the body?
Very difficult question. There's actually one other book of me between the two books, which is not yet translated into any language, because it's basically poetic prose, in the silence of life, which is a book I wrote in 7 years, and which kind of shows the way towards the stone building, actually. I'm not a very strong, let's say, narration is not my strong point. I'm not a good novelist, I don't think so. My strong point is in the language, in the metaphors, in the imagery, in the rhythm. So I actually feel much more at home with trying to write poetic prose than a short story or a novel.
If I say dance, Aslı, dancing, what does that bring to mind?
I have danced almost all my life, and maybe some of the musical elements in my writing come from dance. I try to compose my pieces, especially the stone building, like a musical composition, though I don't know much of the rules of harmony and counterpoint. I'm an amateur musician, but amateur music listener, but a semi-professional dancer. And to the surprise of many people, actually, I was a good dancer. Most people don't expect me to do something good with my body, but I completely surprised them. When I dance, I think I used to dance even better than I could write. And I do believe the real writing for me comes from the body. It's somewhere deep. It's not always possible to reach there. I think the intellectual level is you start with, then you put your heart, and then some people say you put your soul, but I think I put my body. And I know it because my body gives me a signal. I get either very ill or I get cured. I mean, I get so ill sometimes and when I'm writing. And then I know it's real writing. It is coming from somewhere very deep, very primal, in fact, very old. And these texts actually reach the reader more. When I feel nausea, yes, the reader gives a strong feeling too. If I cry while I'm writing, the reader cries too. We meet in a very sincere bridge. But it's not always that, I can't always go that deep. And very often I listen to music when I write. And each book had its music. the mandarin was Schubert, Schubert's piano sonatas. The stone building is Johann Sebastian Bach and Matthäus Passion. And there are moments when I know I can't go any deeper by writing. Then I get up and dance. And that is when it all comes out. The body speaks its poetry, but it's so impossible to transfer to words back. So it is, there is a limit with the words. But now, of course, I had a very important operation 8 years ago. Dancing is actually forbidden, so I have a prothèse in my neck. So this is almost a history. I'm not a good dancer anymore, and my body is a different body now. It's
and actually, the theme of the wounded body is very present. You talked before about the miraculous Mandarin and this one-eyed woman, and yes, so
yeah, the wound is actually, I think, one of my central themes. Separation, split, wound, and loss and absence. And even in my very first book, maybe it's the courage of a beginner, the metaphor is too sharp, maybe, that the absence was so visible. The woman had lost her eye. And it was clearly a metaphor because we never knew why, but also very physically treated this. The pain, the ugly liquids, the feeling of being split in the face, all was very much present in the book. And I think in the City in Crimson Cloak too, it's first we start at Özgür's apartment. There is the dead flies on the walls of Özgür's blood, actually, and it's like almost her body. A wounded woman's body becomes the apartment. Then when she goes out to Rio, actually Rio is at certain moments portrayed as a female body, clearly a wounded body. I mean, even the passage I read, this licking the wounds, this, I like using these, in fact, crude images and crude language time to time. And it's, for example, in literature, we don't see women pissing, sweating, throwing up. Özgür does all of them. We see her body liquids on purpose. In fact, I put these, even in the end, she will urinate before she dies. Yeah, there's a visceral, I think you call
visceral,
it, visceral language in that book. But of course, we are talking about Rio tropics. I mean, you can't really write. I mean, like you are in a monastery to catch the rhythm of tropics and Rio and violence. It's a corporal city. You see the body everywhere. The human body is there. You smell it.
But you mentioned the woman's body,
Yeah.
and for those of you who maybe have bought the book here, the collection of stories, The Stone Building and Other Stories, there are two stories, particular stories in that collection, Wooden Birds and The Prisoner. Mm-hmm. They're obvious examples for me of your instinct for capturing women's voices. And I was wondering how conscious was this attempt to grasp and render some kind of female voice, of writing the body?
Well, actually, I think I completely failed because I always thought of myself as a masculine writer. And I thought I had the male view at the female body. In fact, in the City in Crimson Cloak, I tried, again on sort of semi-purpose. I didn't know yet the Dionysian myths and the Osiris, the mythology. I was just groping in it. Later on, I learned the bisexual element of all resurrection myths and of Dionysius, first of all. But instinctively, I tried to build a bisexual language. Sometimes I talked as a woman, but whenever I described Rio, I tried to speak with a masculine voice. But it was actually another writer who opened my eyes to my own writing. Ruth Kluger is an Austrian writer, and she's also shouldn't be there. She's a concentration camp survivor. She said this book actually captures the female voice, treating a theme that was traditionally considered a masculine theme, which is destruction, self-destruction. We don't really see women going to those deep, far levels. The men are privileged to be self-destructive or to go to those ends. And she said, here it is actually in a female voice, which I was not aware, and it was not actually my intention. And I thought I would be incapable of it, because most of the literature I had read until I was 25 and I became conscious of it was written by men. Then I kind of woke up. It was maybe already too late. And I'm always reading European white men, especially of late 19th and early 20th century. And I think still where I perhaps talked in a female voice was in the silence of life.
But it hasn't been translated yet.
No, will be translated to French, and I'm very anxious about how it will meet the French audience, because it is actually a very boring book. It's poetic prose. There is no narration, almost no narration. There is nothing to charm or call the reader. Just the language and just the situations of existence, let's say, of waiting, of leaving, of coming back, just condition. Yeah, this is the word. Yeah, the details of human condition. But there, it is not the word human, it is a woman. I think only in that book I perhaps managed to even ask myself this question. The woman voice, what is it? And it's a very, very, very difficult question. And I had already gone over 40. Maybe also you need some time in life to hear the woman inside you, actually.
I've got one last question. I think we're running out of time, but last January, you were awarded the Simone de Beauvoir Prize, which you dedicated to the women that you spent your time with when you were in prison. You spent 136 days in prison, right? Because you were arrested on terror charges because of your involvement with the pro-Kurdish newspaper.
Yeah, and I was arrested from 302, the heaviest article in Turkish law, destruction of the unity of the state, which was sentenced. Initially, it was death sentence. Now it's aggravated life sentence.
Life sentence. And you explained to me that aggravated life sentence means that you would be in solitary confinement, or maybe with one other person sharing a cell, but...
till you die. Yeah, it is actually worse than death sentence. In fact, very, very, very heavy.
But my question for you is this. Firstly, in France there has been a recent publication that assembles some of these texts that that caused your imprisonment. The title in French is Le silence même n'est plus à toi, which means even silence is no longer yours.
Mhm.
My question is, do you feel you have been robbed of your silence? And my second question, but we'll try to have to be brief, is when you think about the future and Turkey,
Mhm.
what do you feel about those words together, future, Turkey?
Well, today was the 700th meeting of the mothers of Saturday, the mothers and fathers as well who had, or wives or husbands who have lost, whose relatives are missing for over 20, 30 years, some of them 40. And the police busted and arrested 100. The number is now 100 of them, and they beat up the 2 parliamenters trying to protect this. Most of them are quite old people waiting for their children for over 3 decades. So that's really leaves very little hope in terms of Turkey's future. This article I had written, "The Silence No Longer Belongs to You," is actually was a series I was working on, and I named it as "The Diary of Fascism Today," today. Only the title is provocative. The rest was more poetic prose, quite interior monologue. Of how such an oppressive system destroys you from within. The fear, the despair, the lack of trust, the lack of ability to look into future, all these, and I was just trying to discover actually. But they were interrupted by the fascism acted faster than my pen. They stopped the articles, and one of the articles they put actually as an evidence against me, saying that I was criticizing, which I think I have the right, of an operation on a Kurdish city in that article. Well, I said to the judge, well, I wrote the article in May. You see, it's published in May. That operation was in June. So, and in the article, there is nothing about an operation. There is nothing about a war. It's an interior monologue. Just there's something burning around you. Could have been written in the Warsaw ghetto. Someone surrounded by fire. Could be a metaphorical fire too. How could you connect this to Kurdish town and on top of all, I have the right to criticize whatever, the killing of civilians. And this is the reason why they asked me for a life sentence without being ashamed, is because I wrote 2 articles, one after the other, on the atrocities the Turkish authorities committed in one little Kurdish town, Cizre, where around 150 people were burned alive. They can't even find out the true number because the corpses are missing. They were burned with I don't know what. The corpses have, some of them, disintegrated. They find the jaw of a 12-year-old boy somewhere, just the jawbone. Where is the rest? Nobody knows. And I think any human being has the obligation to write on that, about this. And this is a very huge, this was something in their eyes to ask for aggravated life sentence. And I think this tells everything about Turkey. And I'm not the only one. I mean, of course, surely. Cumhuriyet a few months ago published in the headlines that there are 70,000 students in jail at the moment. 70,000. We can't confirm the numbers because they stopped giving out the statistics for arrests, but at least 150 to 200,000 people have been arrested on political charges in the last 2 years. And they can easily say she's lying, but I can't prove. But the numbers are extremely huge. And when the Second World War started, there were 40,000 people in all German concentration camps. 40,000 is a very big number. It looks small compared to later on when the numbers went up to millions, of course. It's still small, but 40,000 is a very big number. And so is 200,000. And I mean, I am one of the very lucky ones that came out alive, that were released. And Ahmet Altan, another, is a quite famous writer, and he's a very good journalist. Unlike me, he's a prominent columnist for decades, really important brain of liberal thought. He received an aggravated life sentence, and at the age of 62 or something, for supporting the coup. And what is the evidence against him? He was on TV one night before the coup, criticizing the government. I mean, this probably is, I don't know, could happen in Stalin's era or in Hitler's era. These trials, mine too, but hundreds of them are really, if it's not an insult to Kafka, really Kafkaesque. If you see these files, you can't believe your eyes. A 3-year-old child would not write these files, and people get sentences from those 10 years, 20 years, 30 years, life sentences, and not one, not two, 10,000, 20,000. It's really, it's horrible, really horrible. It's much worse than you think you know.
Right. Well, we do hope that the situation gets better. I mean, I know that for the first time in Turkish political history, the pro-Kurdish party now has seats in parliament.
Yeah, but
Erdogan has more executive powers.
Well, 10 of their parliamentarians are still in jail. They had arrested around 15. So they keep the number at 12. They are clever. They release one, they arrest another. So the number is always 12, but the total arrests were, and their leader, Selahattin Demirtas, is one of the most valuable politicians that Turkey has ever produced. Really a marvelous man, and he's also a writer. He published a book, Seher, also translated to French and German. He's in jail. And there is now the discussion of really hanging him. I mean, they want to hang somebody. And there are rumors that he will be the, to be a real dictator, you have to hang a bit. And if they want to hang a woman, maybe I'm the candidate. But yeah, my humor may seem sharp, but it is, Turkey is in that level that I have seen 2 junta regimes, and I can clearly say we have never fallen that low. I mean, not just the state, but also the society. Really, the fascism really is destructive. Deep in your soul. Deep in your soul. People sell each other for nothing. For teachers inform on their students. Students inform on their teachers. Husbands inform on their wives. I mean, it is really... well, they say, I think Yaşar Kemal said it, and a human being is the only animal that can find hope in despair. So we have to, keep the word hope alive. I just can't bury it. I can't. It would be treason to literature. apart from anything else. Why have I written all my life then if I hadn't had the slightest hope? And the whole world, I think, is not going through a very positive time. I must say, maybe another 1930s is coming, a huge wave of right-wing and populism, and all these are at a rise. But I came out of jail mainly because thousands and thousands of people who have never read me or who have never met me went out on streets or went to bookshops, signs, petitions, sent me cards. And yes, there is something in there. Thousands of people, and some children even send me their letters, and it is so beautiful. It's the most beautiful part of being human, that we have compassion and we have a sense of justice, and this is something to build a hope on.
Yes, definitely. We need to. Yes, we need to preserve hope. And as Aslı, I think that you told me before that prison was didn't bring only bad memories to you. So I hope you cling on to those very good memories too, and give us lots and lots of other books that we look forward to reading. I could have stayed on here for the whole night talking to you, but unfortunately time is really running up. But thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
For being so open with us. Thank you.
Thanks a lot for listening to me. I'm a very shy person, so sorry.